So good morning to you. Hello, everybody that's joined us. Thank you for joining us today. This is just us saying hi, and now we're going to turn our cameras off because I'm sure you don't want to watch and listen to us or watch us. You'd prefer hopefully to listen to us. So thanks very much for joining us, everybody. Right, so today you have with you myself, Bryony Kingsland. I'm the Senior Funding and Policy Lead inside City and Guilds. And we also have joining us today Mandy Slaney, who is our Lead Industry Manager. Welcome to our Restart webinar. This is a first in a series of webinars that we will be running on Restart. Look out for further webinars to come. There'll be sector-based webinars where we'll be offering delivery examples relevant to the particular sector subject area for providers that are hoping to support Restart. So this is the first. There are more webinars to come, and without further ado, I'm going to move on. I will be running the first part of the webinar and talking to you about funding and adult education budget use for Restart and giving an overview of the Restart programme. And then later on, Mandy's going to move on and pick up where I step off and talk to you about how certain resources that we have available and how resources can be used, and also the types of participant that we think Restart is going to be looking at. So she'll cover that for you later on. Let's just close the questions down and we can now move on. So the first thing we're actually going to ask is obviously we'd like to know if we've got any providers online with us today that are already in a contract with a Restart Prime provider. So I'm just going to launch a very quick poll and give you a few seconds to answer that. And we've already got 50% of our audience that have voted, and we've got some of you that are in a contract with a Restart Prime provider. Over 50% of you are unsure, and about 31% of you are saying no. I'll just leave it a few more seconds because we've still got some people that are voting. Right, so we've got over 70% of you have voted now, so that's interesting. So 9% of you are already in potentially a contract with a Restart Prime provider. 62% of you are unsure. Oh, it's gone up to 11% now. 61% of you are unsure, and 28% of you say no, that you're not. And 2% are in negotiation with Prime providers. So some of you are already having contact with Prime providers. So that's interesting to know. Thanks for that, everybody. And we've had over 75% of people vote now. So I'm now going to close that poll. Okay, so thank you for that, everybody. That's interesting information. Right, so Restart. So this is an overview of Restart. Oh, don't do that for me. Right. So the Restart scheme was announced in November, actually, during the spending review. And then earlier on this year, DWP went into a commercial process to find prime providers for the Restart scheme. So what is it? It's a 3-year-long programme. So the contracts are 3 years long. The government has committed 2.9 billion to the programme. It's for universal credit claimants. Now, there are some differences between what is available in England and what is available in Wales. So for the Welsh programme, it can be accessed by learners that, or by participants who are 16 and over. But because we have a school leaving age of 18 in England, the accessible eligible age for participation is 18 and over in England. So there are some differences there between the contract package area, the CP area for Wales, and the rest of the contract package areas in England. 18 and over for England and 16 and over for Wales. Participants have to be out of work for at least 12 months. So if you're thinking about furlough and the fact that furlough doesn't end until September this year, that would mean that people who are made redundant at the end of furlough in September this year may well have to wait 12 months, although there is some mention in the contract and in the overview of Restart that Job Centre Plus work coaches who are referring can make decisions to refer someone earlier than 12 months if they haven't been out of work for 12 months, if they feel the Restart programme is appropriate for that person. but generally it's going to be 12 months. So in the initial cases, it's a lot of the people who are going to be accessing the program will have been made redundant in the early stages of lockdown last year. And although this doesn't state specifically that it's a program which is for people that have been made redundant because of the pandemic, we do know that obviously a lot of the people that have been made redundant in the last 12 months have been made redundant because of COVID. So a lot of them are probably going to be in that position. There was around about 650,000 people who were claiming benefit prior to lockdown and the pandemic last year. And a lot of those people have been long-term unemployed and would require a much greater, I think, support mechanism to access employment. So this is for people who are not a long way away from the employment sector, but who with some intervention, some additional support, would hopefully be able to access employment. Now you can see the sort of report, the sort of support here on the right-hand side in the graphic that I've included here on this slide. That will be provided as part of Restart. So the Restart Prime providers and their delivery partners, and delivery partners are tending to be small charities, small and medium-sized enterprises who specialise in particular areas of support, such as addiction, housing and debt support, employability support, mental health, and obviously skills support. Now, interestingly, a lot of the subcontractors that prime providers are already linking up with and had as part of their commercial process response to the tender are those subcontracting providers that you would expect to offer addiction, housing and debt, mental health support. But, you know, having spoken to a few of the prime providers, we've had some surprising responses when we've spoken to them about skills support and what skills support they're intending to put in place, with many of them stating that they're not intending to do much around skills support, which, considering the current situation with automation and, you know, those changes that the fourth industrial revolution is having on the employability and work market, I find that quite surprising. So I think that's something that we're going to see developing over the next 12 months. And also because of the way that the support mechanism works, and I'll talk more about this later, each individual participant will have an action plan that's established at the beginning of their access to the Restart programme. And if they need skills to be able to change jobs or move into another sector, I'm struggling to see how a prime provider can not involve skills and either make referrals to their local skills providers, private providers and colleges, or actually have a subcontracting arrangement with a skills provider. But we'll talk more about the way that the programme works later on, because there are some constraints on prime providers in terms of their on-programme payments and their outcome payments. So, but the great thing about this is that adult education budget can add additionality to the Restart programme, and I've got some more slides on that later on. So yes, adult education funding can be used to offer skills support to the DWP primes and their participants. I think one of the great things about this is that, you know, having spoken to providers over the last 3 or 4 years, many of them have flagged that they've struggled to, or the numbers that they used to have referred to them by Job Centre Plus for adult education budget provision have dropped massively over the last 3 or 4 years because of universal credit. And that's because universal credit is a programme where people mainly apply online. There was no longer any need for some people to go into the job centre in the way that they would have done and see a work coach unless they were mandated to do so because of their universal credit application. And so the number of referrals that used to come in per month to some of the providers I've spoken to could be anything up to 30 or 40, and sometimes more. And in actual fact, in recent years, some of them have had no referrals whatsoever, or those referrals from Job Centre Plus have really dropped down to maybe a couple of months. And that has had an effect on the use of the adult education budget and some of the underspend that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years on the adult education budget. It's not the only reason. There are eligibility criteria there and other constraints that that providers have seen. So I'm hoping for providers and also for those participants in this scheme that actually those referrals will increase and the participants will be able to improve their skills, and that providers will see more referrals from these prime providers and from Job Centre Plus as part of that programme, which will enable you to use more of your adult education budget. But obviously also, if you are a provider that has adult education budget and you are intending to use it, or you're thinking about using it, there are some curriculum planning issues to think about, because if you haven't been delivering this sort of provision for the last 4 or 5 years because of those drops in referrals from Job Centre Plus, then you'll want to think about what curriculum you can offer, what sort of support Restart participants will need, and therefore what changes you might need to make to your curriculum over the next 2 or 3 years to accommodate that. And then within that, we know that there's issues around cohort sizes and return on investment, and making sure that you can actually provide provision without there being a cost to you that's a negative return on investment. So that's a Restart overview. So it's one more thing to mention. This is a Department of Work and Pensions programme. It's not a Department for Education programme. So the funding sits with DWP, and the functional aspect of the programme is being managed by Job Centre Plus. So they will assess claimant suitability. So as claimants come through the door and as they're monitoring those claimants in their period of unemployment, they will make the decision about whether the participant is eligible and suitable for the Restart programme, because there are other programmes that JCP run which may be more suitable. So Job Centre Plus will make that assessment and then refer that participant to the prime provider for the next stage in the process. So let's have a look at some of those contract package areas. So now you can see them there. There are 12 CPAs, as they're known, contract package areas. And you can see them laid out on the map there, and you can also see the contract winners there on the right hand side. I'm not going to concentrate too much on that slide because the next slide gives you a lot more information. So again, those are the 12 contract package areas that you can see on the left hand side there. West Central, East Central, and in the centre I've done a breakdown of the contract package areas, the CPA's coverage and the areas that they cover. I've also included the prime provider there, the winner for that particular contract package area. And very kindly, DWP did some work in the early stages of their commercial process for this and estimated the approximate number of starts or participant starts they can see for the particular contract package area. And you can see there the estimated amount of starts for each area, and also the estimated contract value for each of those areas as well over the course of 3 years. So those estimated starts and those estimated contract packages are the 3-year programs that have been put in place. We will be sharing these slides after the event, and a recording of this webinar will be put up on our new Restart webpage, because we've just developed a Restart webpage to support providers who want more information. So this will be available on there after this webinar today. So how does the Restart scheme referral model work? So within the first 8 weeks of the referral from Job Centre Plus, there has to be an initial warm handover meeting, and you can see the process here on the left hand side. So there's a face-to-face meeting with the provider and the JCP work coach, the Job Centre Plus work coach, the referred participant and any provider staff that are relevant to that initial warm handover. Then the prime provider has to complete a diagnostic assessment for every single participant, which identifies what are their current barriers to employment. And as we've said earlier, some of those current barriers, some of those barriers may be housing and debt. During the stage of their last 12 months, if they've been made redundant because of COVID, they may have found themselves getting into debt. They may find that they've got problems with housing, or with mortgage payments, etc. So they will be referred to subcontractors that cover those particular specialist areas. So that initial diagnostic will identify the participants' current employment barriers, their skills barriers, and any requirement that they've got there to gain new skills, or to upgrade their skills, or to expand their employability skills and needs. And they'll be referred to provision which supports them with that during the 365 days. Now, once they start on programme, they have 365 days from that first face-to-face meeting before they are complete on that programme. If they haven't found employability during that 365 days, they are referred back to Job Centre Plus for other types of provision and support. So during the on-programme phase, they have a one-to-one contact fortnightly. That can take place face-to-face, or it can take place online if the participant has access to online. And then there is a face-to-face meeting every 4 weeks, and that's to review the SMART plan that's been developed as an outcome of that diagnostic assessment. So the tailored support program you can see there with the big green arrow in the middle can include careers advice, skill support, and that includes maths and English and employability, mental health support, the employment and employability support, job search and vacancy identification and support, and then any other social personal barriers that I mentioned earlier on. There's a review of the diagnostic assessment every 4 months to make sure that the individual participant is still gaining and getting the support they need that's relevant to their particular situation at that time. And then at the end of the 365 days, if they are still on programme 365 days, there's a final action plan, which basically outlines all the individual activities, and that's shared with the Job Centre Plus work coach when the participant turns to JCP if they haven't found a job. Now, completion, the participant is deemed as completing on their restart program, and this can happen at any time during those 365 days in any of those circumstances that you can see on the right. So they've completed the 365 days and have not achieved a job outcome, they are returned to Job Centre Plus. But if during that 365 days the participant has achieved employment or self-employment, that is a positive outcome. Now, there are some constraints around this for the prime providers, because the on-programme, we don't know the unit price for Restart yet that the prime providers are getting. But what we do know is that there is only for the unit price per participant, whilst that participant is on programme, the prime provider only receives 30% of that price. There is a 70% outcome payment. So that's a real challenge for the prime providers, and they are going to want to, we presume, get those participants into jobs as fast as possible so they can get that outcome payment. Once the participant is into a job, they have to remain in that job for 6 months. So they can't go into a job for 6 weeks or 3 months or 4 months. They've got to remain in that employment. So it's got to be meaningful employment for at least 6 months, and they have to remain in that job for 6 months, which will be tracked by Job Centre Plus and HMRC. So HMRC will provide Job Centre Plus with information about that individual participant to ensure that they are still in employment 6 months later, at which point the prime provider will receive that 70% outcome payment. So that's a tough on-programme model with only 30% of the unit price available for the on-programme provision. So as I said, we think prime providers are going to be wanting to get those participants into a job as far as possible and as fast as possible. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if that person is going into a job, that if you as a potentially a skills provider, if we've got skills providers on this webinar, cannot continue with can't not continue with delivery to that individual, as long as that delivery can take place on a part-time evening basis or whatever it is, or if it's on a blended learning model delivery and you're able to access that learner, and they're able to access webinars or other ways of completing a program or a qualification that you might be taking up with them. Because what we wouldn't want to see is skills providers achievement rates being affected because the prime provider says, right, we've got them a job, so they're no longer on program with you, we're taking them off and putting them into a job elsewhere. So that's just something for skills providers to think about as well, is to have that conversation with the prime provider about your achievement rates, because they can't be affected because you're supporting the referral model for Restart. So that's something to think about, but there's also modules out there, units and small awards, which can be delivered in a much shorter space of time, which can help those learners if they've got skills barriers to accessing employment. So that's the Restart referral model. Well, let's have a look at the adult education budget and eligibility, because we've had a lot of questions from both Restart providers and also from some skills providers about what a Restart participant can access. And the great thing about the adult education budget is there's no upper limit for 24 plus unemployed to access a lot of provision, skills provision, that's fully funded if they are unemployed. So you can see there for 19 to 24-year-olds, almost everything is fully funded. So as we said, Restart is for 18 plus, and this is for England only, the adult education budget. Wales have a slightly different arrangement, and we may well do a webinar about that for Welsh providers later on. So this is the English adult education budget funding. So 19 to 24-year-olds are fully funded for almost everything, but so are 24 plus unemployed. Now, the only areas that they're not unemployed here are not covered if they're unemployed, and if they've already got a full level 3 qualification in a particular sector, subject area, or occupation. But if they don't have a full level 3, and a full level 3 equivalent is the equivalent of 2 A levels, 4 AS levels, or a diploma or certificate of at least 360 guided learning hours if it's a vocational or technical qualification. So if they don't have that, they are still eligible to access either the first full level 3 as part of legal entitlement if they're a 19 to 23-year-old, or if they're 24-year-old, the new adult offer of the National Skills Fund first full level 3. There's no upper age threshold on that access whatsoever. So if any of the participants that are referred to you don't have those full level 3s, they've got full access to that. Anything above that is loan funded, I'm afraid. But we think that a lot of people that will be referred will be level 2 and level 3 learners. So this is an opportunity for them to access either further level 2s, or if they haven't got a full level 3 in some shape or form. There's also ESOL access there, which is fully funded for 24 plus unemployed and for 19 to 23-year-olds. So that's the grid that tells you what your participants may be eligible for in terms of skills via the adult education budget. And it will be mainly the adult education budget that they will access, because that's the funding stream that most providers have got access to, that will provide because of the age range available for those in England. Wales obviously is slightly different. So there's a poll question here, so we're just interested to know how many of those of you online on the webinar actually have an adult education budget contract and allocation with the Education and Skills Funding Agency. So I'm just going to open up the polls again and share this particular poll. So let's do this one and launch that now. So if you could all just let us know if you have an adult education budget allocation, which will enable you to support Restart. We do know that there are some skills providers out there that are also subcontracting with prime providers, and they'll be delivering with prime provider funding, potentially not using their adult education budget, but there are some things that the adult education budget doesn't cover. So if prime providers are willing to pay for that out of the unit price they have per participant, for extra and additional skills that may help these participants get into work, then that's great. Just wait a couple more seconds, because 63% of you have voted. So we've got so far 44% saying yes, they do have an adult education budget allocation. 15% say no, 32% of you are unsure, and a small proportion of you, 6%, are still waiting to hear, because the ESFA carried out the commercial process for the next round of 3-year adult education budget contracts earlier on this year. So some of you are obviously still waiting to hear whether you've got through that tender process or not. Thanks very much for that, everybody. I'm going to close that poll now, because almost 70% of you have voted. So that's the end of that poll, and I'm now going to pass on to Mandy, who is going to pick up the City and Guilds Restart sector example delivery frameworks and some of the resources that we are able to offer for those of you that will be supporting Restart. Mandy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bryony. Good morning, everyone. Behind the scenes, we are doing lots and lots of work around really putting together a variety of different delivery example programs. So we really just want to give you sort of a snapshot of a couple of areas that we have developed that we wanted to share with you today. Also, you know, we are really keen that we gather feedback from you around, is this what you're looking for? Is there something missing? So we have put an email address at the end of the webinar today, but we really would like to, you know, if anybody wants to have a chat or, you know, catch up around talking through this, we would welcome any feedback. So the first part that we've looked at is really around looking at the work-ready transferable skills. And what we know is, there's lots of different, whether it's pre-employment, whether it's reskilling, or actually the leadership and management. Because all these participants, they all have different, skill sets, experiences. So it's really giving you a flavour, and these are just, a few examples. But also what we've looked at is how you can contextualise these. So if there is, a participant that's looking to go into the care sector, which transferable skills would they need to help them progress, to enable them to gain employment in that sector. So next slide, really, Bryony, please. So what we've done is we've actually tried to give some example personas. So, different examples of participants, different needs, where would they like to go to, what have they done before. So the one I'm going to talk about today really is Annie. So Annie's been made redundant from a local department store. Her role was a team leader. She's really looking to get back into work, but she's actually considering now, she doesn't really want to go back into retail. So is there another sector that she can move into? She's lots of transferable skills, but actually very few formal qualifications. And actually she really lacks confidence now. Actually losing her job has really knocked her back, and she needs to gain that confidence in order to look at progressing into employment. The next slide, please, Bryony. So what we've done is we've actually tried to put a journey together, a participant journey, and what that might look like. So this is really just giving an example of a framework which will enable Annie to progress into employment. So what we've done is we've looked at, what areas, what skill sets has she already got, and what would she need in order for her to progress and move to a job in the care sector. So we've looked at sort of the pre-job, so looking at, you actually look at the introduction to the care sector. What does that look like? Is that something I want to work in? So really just giving that introduction. And then also looking at some of the skills that she lacks. So, Annie's, she can do digital, but it's actually, she really could brush up on improving that. So we've looked at units, and these are all units which sit in qualifications, but also there's content there, so you could actually look at that as well. So things like, actually applying for jobs, going online, using the internet, using email, and then also things like equality and diversity, dealing with challenges. These are just a selection of different transferable skills we feel that would really enable Annie to move on. And then that can progress to actually getting into a job and actually picking up formal qualifications and indeed an apprenticeship if that was right for Annie. The next slide, please, Bryony. So this is really telling you the story of the journey. So this is really going from day one, when the initial diagnostics and all the the pre-work that Bryony mentioned before that will happen. So it's really doing a full assessment of Annie's needs, and putting a personalised plan together. Then looking at things like employability and well-being, debt management. Really, looking at interview skills. Annie's going to need to help. It's going to help Annie to get a job. She may not have to apply for a job for many years, so that will all be new to Annie. And then you can move on to the transferable skills. So actually, what skills would really help Annie get into the care sector? So really looking at things like equality and diversity, and actually dealing with the challenges, and also the introduction to the care sector. And then that can progress to the digital skills, and then as the journey continues, she can actually then, if she really is keen around, she definitely wants to go into care, and she's actually trying to work out which areas of care would she like to go into. So she could actually pick up and complete the actual qualification, which is preparing to work in social care. And that really gives lots of different, like the principles of communicating in the adult care sector, lots of the underpinning sort of knowledge that would help Annie to gain that employment. Then she could progress, and then Annie gets, she is actually successful. She gets a job in adult social care, but it doesn't stop there, because I think the key thing is Annie needs to make sure, she's engaged and motivated and actually stay in the job. So she, she really sees this as a long-term career. She's got lots of leadership skills that she gained from a retail experience, but actually she's not got formal qualifications. So perhaps something like, a level 2 ILM, leadership and team skills, would be ideal for Annie to actually be able to, complete a qualification based on a competence and skills she's gained. And then Annie's journey progresses through. So that could actually be formal qualifications or actually an apprenticeship. And then, she can progress to different levels and work her way up within the actual adult care sector. The next slide, Bryony. This is really just to give some ideas of some of the support materials that are available to support Annie with that journey. So this is really just an example of some of the content that we've got, which would support the actual ILM qualification. There's lots of different content available, and I think it's just really what's right for Annie. Does she like digital online learning, or is she more actually she'd like to just do research, or not online. Other versions of that could be face-to-face activities. Next slide, Bryony. Now, what we've done, and we will be putting these together for each of the sector areas, is we've just given an idea. If you are an AAB contract holder, this just really gives you sort of a menu of all the different qualifications that Annie could do, and actually the hours that are attached to it, and that where are they funded via. So some are as AAB, and some, if it's apprenticeship, they'd be levy funded. So what we will be doing is similar examples to this for all the sector areas. So this is really just a taster. Next slide, Bryony. This, and I'm not going to go in detail, but basically what we've done is we've looked at different participants. So Rihanna's 22. She's been in and out of jobs and really not sure what she wants to do. A sort of ultimate goal really is perhaps she wants to be self-employed in perhaps a construction industry. So, but her sort of transferable skills, she needs a lot more support really, and I think also money's a big thing for Rihanna, because she needs to earn money. She needs a flat, and she needs to get into work as soon as possible. Next slide, Bryony.
I just mention here, Mandy, because I've just had a question. These are not real personas, everybody. These are after discussions with some of the primes and discussions with DWP, we looked at the type of potential participant we might see. And I mentioned earlier on that prior to COVID, there was a large group of people across England that were unemployed, but they've been unemployed for a very long period of time, and we're very, very far from the employment market. Quite a few of these people that we think primes, and that DWP think primes are going to see coming through as participants, maybe like Anna, they may well have been employed for quite a long time, and very, very permanently employed and quite comfortably employed with no concern about unemployment. And then you will get other participants coming through who have job hopped, and others like Rihanna who are low skilled to a certain extent and have got very basic employability skills, but really do need to now move on into a more permanent job. And also there's people who know that their sectors have been drastically affected by COVID, and actually it's unlikely they'll be able to get a job in their sector again in the future, or they don't feel their sector is safe anymore. So retail is one where we are seeing a lot of people saying actually retail is no longer an area that there's enough jobs in to keep me employed on an ongoing basis. Hospitality as well, although hospitality is opening up again and there are a lot of jobs available in hospitality at the moment, but some people may not feel it's a safe sector for them anymore. So there are definitely certain industries and occupations where DWP and the Prime see more people coming through that will want to swap and move into other sectors and want to support to gain skills in those sectors so they can apply for a job in a different occupation. So I just think that's worth flagging, and the fact that these are not real people. We're just talking about personas that we've discussed with DWP and with Prime providers.
Thanks, Brian. Next slide. And again, this is just showing the example. So you'll see that actually Rihanna needs a lot more transferable skills in order for her to progress And then you see things like health and safety. They're key. If she wants to work in construction, she's going to have to, get the underpinning knowledge. She's going to have to get the CSCS card. So this really just gives a program of, a variety of different ways that she can gain them skills and progress through into employment. Next slide, Brian. And again, this is just giving examples of the support resources that would enable Rihanna to complete, whether it's just actually giving her this sort of underpinning knowledge, but also she'll be able to complete the qualifications.
So this is the final poll for the day, everybody. I suppose our interest is how many organisations out there are considering becoming a provider of services to Restart participants, whether that's AEB or anything else. So if I just launched that poll, it's the third one there. Oh, is it going to allow me? Yes, it is. Thank goodness. Right, so I've just launched that. I'm assuming that if you're on this webinar, it's definitely something that you're interested in as an organisation, and that you are strongly considering getting involved in Restart. Obviously, we've given the CPA areas and the prime providers, and if you are an adult education budget and you haven't had conversations as yet with the prime providers that are covering the area in which you're based, now is the time to do it. Restart is due to start at the end of June. So from early July, participants will start to be referred to those prime providers. So there's an awful lot of work going on in the next 5 or 6 weeks with prime providers and their subcontractors and providers in the regions of their CPA, looking at what their model of delivery will be, what access they have to that additional funding that is the adult education budget, and any other funding out there that may not even be skills based. And obviously they'll be wanting to access that and having conversations. So now is the time to go and talk to those primes and see and show them what your offer is and what you can do to support those participants, because it's going to be really important program, we think, to getting people back into work after the pandemic. And we are expecting there to be a fairly sizable increase in unemployment figures in September this year when the furlough scheme comes to an end. And there's no further information from government, I think, about furlough being extended beyond September. So it would not surprise me as if people have been people who were made redundant in September have been unemployed for a good 6 or 7 months may end up being referred early. There is a clause in the contract that says that JCP may refer people early if they feel it's appropriate. So yes, expecting an increase in unemployment later on this year after furlough ends. And it'll be interesting to watch the unemployment figures then, because that'll give us a much better idea of the number of referrals that are going to happen in CPA areas over the coming months as that furlough scheme ends. So that I'm going to close that poll now. Over 60% of you have voted, and just as an outcome, 49 to 50% of you say yes, you definitely want to or are planning to be a support provider for Restart participants with those primes. 4% of you are saying no, and 40% of you are unsure, which is probably why you're on the webinar today, trying to find out about it. So thanks for that, everybody. I'm now going to close that poll. Actually, I must remember to close it, because if I don't close it, then you can't see our screen. I've done that once before, and that was not a happy outcome. Right, so these are our Restart contact details and support resources. We have already established a website specifically for Restart. And we have a Restart lead. One of our business support managers, Joe Bell, is the Restart lead. So you can contact Joe on his email address there, and also via the Restart page there. And you can see the link to the website. And you can see that during June and July, we have specific sector webinars coming up showing the resources that we're developing and putting in place to support specific sector subject areas for Restart participants. Ooh, that's a big word this morning for me. So that's our support resources, and watch out for development of that website, because as we gain more and more resources and develop more and more support, we will be putting that information up on that website, and you'll also be able to get access to a recording of this webinar on that website within the next 48 hours or so once we've downloaded it and loaded it up onto the website. And just one more thing to be aware of, City and Guilds is launching its Skills Index. on the 9th of June. This is a report that we've been putting together, and one of our communication and research teams have been doing an awful lot of work looking at emerging and in-demand skills that are coming up as part of COVID-19 labour market research. And Kirsty, our CEO, will be hosting that webinar on Wednesday the 9th of June. It's going to be a really key webinar to get involved with, because we've done some really good analysis of in-demand skills for the UK labour market out in the regions, right across England, and that'll be broken down into areas as well, so you'll be able to see what the skills needs are in your areas during that webinar, and also potentially, think about what support you can then put in place that's going to address those skills needs. And we know with the FE White Paper that the Secretary of State for Education is intending to make sure that regional areas are more supportive of their labour market skills needs and skills shortages in the coming year or two. So it's worth being aware of that now, because they're going to be developing intervention powers for the Secretary of State if providers are not responding to those local labour market skills needs. But also, part of the Restart contract requires Restart Prime providers to engage with their local bodies, such as their mayoral combined authorities or their local economic partnerships, the LEPs, and other community groups and area groups that look at labour market needs and labour market shortages. The prime providers have to engage with those bodies to understand what labour market shortages are and try and address them as part or have them in mind whilst they're dealing with those participants and those referrals. So all of those linked labour market requirements and that skills index webinar on the 9th of June are all linked together.